We want to start with a simple land acknowledgement, and as we were alluding to just a couple of minutes ago, there is a link that is in the chat box. So in case you're not right in the area where of Whatcom County and Bellingham area, where we'll be specifically acknowledging the local Indigenous people groups, you can click on that link and find out what are the groups that are Indigenous to your area where you're currently residing, and that might be helpful. And then an option there is to indicate, I think as Deb has there modeled for us, to put your name and the groups or tribes or Indigenous people groups that are from the area that you are currently residing in. And that would be great, just a sharing out that way. And you can go ahead and do that while we're reading this short acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and our shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. At this point, I want to introduce a very good friend of mine who is also a very good friend of many of yours as well, and that is Linda Conroy. Linda Conroy will be leading us into the next phase of our evening together and doing some introductions. So, Linda.
Thank you, Brian. This is with such excitement that I begin with, or get to begin with, first of all, we'll do a pause and be centered, and then I'll introduce Elizabeth, who has just been a special gift in my life. I wanted to do our opening meditation from one line of her book, Elizabeth's book, Loving Water Across Religions, if you can see that. And in the last line of in acknowledgements, after she lists with love and respect the different, and gratitude to the different people who've contributed to her work, her last line is, I offer endless gratitude to all my relations, especially to water, my friend, teacher, and guide. May any merit that arises from this book benefit all beings. So at Still Point, when we do offerings, we take a moment, and in silence, in any way that is comfortable for each person, we invite people to send a blessing to the presenter. And I wish to invite us now via Zoom, but just via the reality that we're interconnected beyond Zoom, to offer a blessing on Elizabeth, a blessing for her time with us, but also upon her and her work, but also to not just Elizabeth's friend, teacher, and guide, but a blessing upon water and air, on all of the elements, and a blessing upon each other. So we'll just spend a few moments in silence. So as we ask for a blessing on each other, a blessing on Elizabeth, upon sacred earth, We also ask for a blessing on all of those who are suffering due to war or all forms of injustices. I too welcome you and express my gratitude for your presence. And Elizabeth, what a joy that you said yes to us. If you've read the poster, and I'm assuming you did, then you will know that Elizabeth is many things, and they're listed on the poster, and they're listed on the back of her book. That she is the newsletter and website manager for Yale Forum of Religion and Ecology and Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale University, and that she has been a teacher in many areas of environment, ethics, comparative religions, and philosophy of religion. And I asked Elizabeth permission that we could also include the fact that she's a musician. She loves to play the flute and to sing. So with great gratitude, welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's great to be here. I am so happy that you all came. Thank you for coming. I see a good number of friends, so thank you. And those of you who I don't know, I hope that I'll get to know you in this time together. I want to share some things, and as I'm talking, I really want you to be thinking of anything that you would like to share too, about water, about your own relationship to this element, this sacred source of life. And I hope that after I share some things, that we can open up dialogue and that I can hear from you and we can all learn from each other about different ways that we can learn to love water deeply. So that's the point of this time together, the practice of loving water. And I think I'd like to start by sharing a really beautiful poem by Mary Oliver called Summer Day. Okay, so I'll read this, and as I read this, I'd like you to take it to heart. Okay, so it starts like this. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who's eating sugar out of my hand, who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is, but I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think that question, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I think that is a helpful guiding question for our time together and our time beyond this meeting. For me, one of the things that I feel is calling me to respond is water. And I feel like I've focused a lot of my, I guess a good amount of my life so far on studying this sacred substance, this liquid solid gas that connects us all. And what I like most about water is the fact that water can be seen as a friend. and as a companion, as a relative, as a teacher and guide. So when I think about water, I don't just think about H2O. I don't, that's not the first thing that comes to mind. I think about particular bodies of water that I have connections with. Like I think about this creek that is my little backdrop. This is Strawberry Creek. This is one of my absolute favorite friends. I walk by this creek almost every day in Berkeley, California. And when I think about water, I think about the San Francisco Bay. I think about rain that is so precious that we need so much more of it here in the Bay Area. So I think about particular bodies of water. And so one of the things that I feel is really important in my own life, and what I really would like to encourage you all to do, is to learn how to cultivate a deeper relationship with water, and with water as some being that is loving. So the practice of loving water is, our own human practice to learn to love water and to care for water, respect water. But it's also, I think, a practice to see water as a loving being, as an integral part of our whole earth community, as the source of life, the one who nourishes all beings. We depend upon water for everything in our life, whether or not we are consciously realizing it at the time. But water flows through every aspect of our life, every aspect of our world, every life form. We're all different forms of water. And so to see water as someone that we can interact with in a more conscious way, a more loving way, a more respectful way, I think that practice is crucial for our time. I don't really want to get into the global water crisis today, but I know that we all know the pollution of water, the scarcity of fresh water, the lack of drinking water for so many people around the world, climate change. It's a water issue. There are so many aspects of the global water crisis, and I feel that it's really important to learn how to respond in ways so that we can feel that we're not simply afraid of the future, but that we can respond in ways that feel grounded and nourished, and so we can find ways to recharge and to feel that we have that energy that can move us into the next phase, into a sacred earth community, into like this great transition, or the great work, the great turning. So whenever I think about the practice of loving water, I think that it's a lifestyle, a life way, that involves particular practices. It's about training, it's about discipline, it's about learning to transform your life. And so that's that kind of sense of the practice of loving water. That's what I want to be talking about. And I thought it might be helpful to go through some particular practices that I've spent a little bit of time writing about and practicing myself. So in my book, Loving Water Across Religions, I have a chapter on contemplative practices for cultivating an integral water ethic. And I think that will be helpful to consider what are some particular practices that can help us to love water and that can help us see water as a loving being who nurtures us and who we can learn how to have a deeper relationship with. So whenever I think about contemplative practices, I think about practices that can cross over different religious traditions, ones that aren't specific to a particular religion, but that can be practiced with a number of different lenses in mind and different perspectives. And a lot of these practices, when I think about contemplative practices, I think, like Mary Oliver was saying, I think about there are ways to pay attention. I mean, that's what she was saying. Like, she doesn't know what prayer is, but she knows how to pay attention. And I think that is key to the practice of loving water. Learning how to pay attention, how to see water as a being that is flowing constantly throughout the world, and to learn how to not take water for granted. Because I think that the act of taking water for granted is part of the problem that we're in. We forget water. We forget that we are, living with a living ancestor. This ancestor water, some molecules of water have been around since before our solar system. That blows my mind. I can't really wrap my head around the fact that we have water on our earth that is older than our earth, older than our sun. And so, like, if we learn how to treat water as a relative, as a mother, as a sister, a brother, as a friend, then that will change the way that we treat water. The way that you view water will have rippling effects to the different ways that, say, you might conserve water, or the different choices that you make when you buy particular products or food. You'll think more about, well, how does water relate to this? How much water goes in to making this cup of coffee, or this pair of pants, or this car? And we can see how the things in our world that aren't so obviously water, they really are intimately composed with water. And so that's, I think, learning how to take water in a way, like, to pay attention to water, and to like remember the significance of water. That's crucial for our time. So I'd like to share a few of the contemplative practices that I've written about in this book. And one, as I mentioned, one reason why it's important to think about practice is because that can change us, that can transform our minds, can transform our attitudes, our actions. And so if we learn how to engage in conscious practices, then that can help to renew our own sensitivity, our own passion, our own zest for life. We can learn how to live more fully as humans in the world whenever we can just practice doing that. So one practice that I write about is the simple act of drinking a glass of water. And if you have water with you right now, or if you can easily grab a glass, we can kind of go through this practice. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I like I like thinking about acts that we do on a daily basis constantly. Because if you can start with those kinds of actions, then you have tons of opportunities to practice. Okay, so with this practice, what I basically write about is paying attention to water, becoming mindful of water as you drink water. Okay, Thich Nhat Hanh, he has a great quote about like, what is mindfulness? And he says, when you drink a glass of water and you're aware that you're drinking a glass of water, that is mindfulness of drinking water. Okay, it's very simple and basic. But how many times do we drink a glass of water throughout the day and we are not even aware that we're doing it? It's like if you're driving down the road and you arrive at your destination and then you think, how did I get here? I'm here, but I don't remember the journey at all. You know, it's that kind of thing where we can easily forget that we're taking water into our bodies, and that we have this opportunity to become aware of the water that we're drinking whenever we are drinking the water. So this practice, what I say is basically, if you hold your water and you look at it and you smell it, you might dip your finger in it, see what is the temperature of this water. And before you drink the water, note that you're holding something special. And I find that it can be very beneficial to pause before drinking water and to listen and to open up your heart and to perhaps say a prayer, or to ask water, what would you like to teach me? What messages do you have to say? You know, like take a moment to be with water, and then take some water into your mouth, and before you drink, hold it there for a moment, and then swallow it. And as you do this, realize how this act of drinking water is connecting you with the larger hydrological cycle. Like you are part of something that's much larger than you. And drinking water can help to remind us of this simple, basic fact that we're part of the hydrological cycle, that we are a vessel for water to come through, to move out, and then to connect with other forms of life through the practice of drinking water. And I started doing this practice whenever I was writing my dissertation, which turned into my book, because I wanted to come up with some kind of ritual that could help me connect with what I was writing about. And I would hold a bowl of water in my hands. I would use this special little bowl that I have that was connected with a memorial service for Thomas Berry. And I would hold this bowl of water every time before I would sit down to write. And I would do this kind of practice of pausing, of asking water, what do you want to teach me? To maybe offer up some reflections, like to speak to water, or to see what comes up, if there might be like a song that would come up, or some kind of message. And sometimes there wouldn't, but it would help to ground me. It would help me to remember it's important to hydrate, and it's important to know what you're bringing into your body, and to treat water with a kind of respect and care that normally would be forgotten about. So So that is one practice that I feel is helpful. You can do this kind of thing also if you were, say, taking a bath or a shower, to like to know that you are doing that, not just to do it to get it done. Likewise, washing the dishes. You don't have to wash dishes just to get them done, but you can have that be an act of prayer or an act of service, an act of mindfulness, a way to remember that you're alive and that every moment is an opportunity to wake up and to be more present, and in the case with water, to learn how to commune with water, to be with water and not just try to hurry along with your day. Another practice that I think can be really helpful is what I call a gratitude walk. You can call it walking mindfully if you'd like. And with this practice, what I recommend doing is going on a walk, but going a bit slower, just a little bit slower. You don't have to do like full-on walking meditation or something. If you're walking down the sidewalk, you don't have to feel self-conscious because you're walking really slow. You can just walk normally, but just a little slower. And with this practice, I recommend walking to a particular body of water, preferably one that's close by, so it can be a walk. If you need to drive, then that's fine. But once you get out of the car, to slowly walk to a particular body of water. And as you walk, I think it's really helpful to be really mindful, really conscious about what you're interacting with, who you're interacting with, and to try to see the things that are in your world as living beings who you can learn from. Okay. And so this kind of gets into an idea of that Thomas Berry was really driving home when he would say the world isn't a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. And so if we can learn how to see the different beings that we pass by when we're walking as beings in this world, in this living earth community with us, then we'll not treat them as mere its and mere things that would be dominated and controlled, but instead would cause us to act in a way that like help us to treat the different beings as fellow members and citizens of our earth. So instead of seeing water as something that you can put a price tag on and commoditize, or privatize, or seeing water as a sewer that takes away our waste, instead of seeing water as a resource only, then we can learn how to see water as a sacred source of life, as a living being that demands our respect and care. And so on this gratitude walk toward the water, you can learn to open up your eyes and just try to greet others around you. And it can be helpful to see the other beings on your path as your best friend. And just that act of practicing, seeing something like water or a bird or a tree as a friend, that act of practicing, the more you do it, the easier it becomes and the more real it becomes for you. So you don't have to keep trying. It will come more naturally the more that you do it. And so if you go and you walk to a body of water and treat that water as if you're spending time with a friend, then that can really help shift an attitude toward an attitude of love and compassion and care. And I started doing this kind of practice during a retreat with the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I got my doctorate. We had annual retreats at the Esalen Institute. And on that property, there is a bridge that goes over a creek called Hot Springs Creek. And one time as I was walking over, I decided to like slow down and pay attention and to try to like notice that I was actually going over a creek instead of just walking really quickly. And I started doing this on a daily basis during our week there. And then one of the last nights that I was there, as I was doing this new practice, where I would basically hold my hands out, palms down, and try to sense with my hands as I walked slowly over the bridge, over the creek, I heard a question arise. And the question was, how can I be of service? And this question was very interesting to me because I felt that it was both my question, my own human question, and it was a question of water. It was the question that water had for me. How can I be of service? And that really shifted my consciousness. It helped me to see that water is a being who is of service, who benefits all beings without exception. And it reminded me of a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says that water is a bodhisattva who benefits all beings, something like that. And for those of you who don't know, a bodhisattva is a being who vows to become awakened in order to liberate the suffering of all beings. And so this being who has both compassion and wisdom. And with Thich Nhat Hanh saying that water is a bodhisattva, that was really striking to me. And so that whenever I heard that question as I walked over the bridge, how can I be of service? It really drove home the point that yes, water is a bodhisattva. Water is compassionate. Water is wise. Like a bodhisattva is one who has compassion for the suffering of all beings, but also has this wisdom of the knowledge of the interconnectedness of all things, the fact that everything is connected with everything else, and our own personal self is an illusion. Like we are composed of the world. And water can teach us that. You know, water teaches us about the interconnectedness of all things. Because if you take away water, you take away all forms of life. You know, water is that liquid elemental thread connecting all beings on earth. And so water is wise in that way, wise to the interconnectedness of all things. But water at the same time is this compassionate being who tries to alleviate the suffering of others by nourishing others, giving up itself so that others could have life. And so we can learn how to be with the suffering of others by learning how to act like water. And so I found that was a really pivotal moment for me. Having that question, how can I be of service, coming not just from my own self, but from the water that I was walking over. And so that has become a practice that I try to do every time I walk over a bridge now. I always try to hush and to listen to the flow of the creek or the flow of the river. I always try to do a kind of Tai Chi Qigong kind of practice of sensing with the palms of my hands, and to have it as if there are eyes on the center of my hands that can help me sense in a deeper way, sense with my whole self. Just like White Tara would have eyes on the center of her palms to help her to see the suffering of others. And that kind of practice is very helpful for me. And I encourage you to try that kind of thing when next time you're walking over a bridge, to open your heart to gratitude, and to listen and see what comes up, what arises from the water that you're being with at that moment. And there are some other practices that I write about. And let me see, I think I would like to share another one that is called the Bowl of Tears. And this is a practice that Joanna Macy developed. It's part of the work that reconnects. And this is a group practice that is done where, as a group, you come together and there's a bowl of water placed in the center of the room, the center of the group. And this bowl of water is key to the practice. The practice is called the Bowl of Tears, and each person in the group is invited to come up to this bowl of water and to pick up some water with their hands and let it stream down through their fingers. And as they do this, they are invited to say, "My tears are for," and then to speak their grief, to speak what are you feeling, what are you grieving right now. And each person has the opportunity to come to this bowl of water and say, "My tears are for," and then to name what they're for. And at the end of this practice, the bowl is picked up and walked to a nearby body of water, and then is poured into that water. And as it's poured into the larger body of water, the facilitator would say something like, "This helps us see that our own personal tears are actually the tears of our whole earth. Our own suffering is the suffering of others, and vice versa. The suffering of others is our own suffering." And this kind of practice can really help us to, first of all, to be with grief and to see the sacred dimension that comes with grief. The importance to acknowledge what you're feeling, particularly if it's not great, because often we don't talk about that kind of thing if we're in groups. It's a more private matter. But if we can learn how to be with grief, and particularly to be with grief in a group setting, then we can better see how the suffering of all beings can be held in our own hearts, and that we're not alone whenever we hold the suffering of others. And Joanna Macy has a wonderful quote where she says that the heart that breaks open can hold the whole universe. Your heart is that large. Trust it and keep breathing. And I feel that that is so important right now, because we're at this moment in time where the notion of eco anxiety and eco grief, it's huge. It's like a lot of people are feeling the overwhelm and the lack of knowing what to do, as we're learning more and more about the state of the world, the fate of the planet. And so it's so important to find rituals and practices where we learn how to see grief for what it is. And it's this opportunity to to break open and to hold others, to learn how to say yes, even in the face of despair. And I feel that's really, really important for our time. I have some other practices that I write about, but I think it would be helpful to open it up for a discussion to see if any of you feel like sharing any particular practices that you have that help you cultivate a sense of love and care for water, or to see water as a loving, caring being. If you have practices to share, or if you'd like to share your relationship with water, so that we can get a sense of different stories and different perspectives in our group. So would anybody like to share anything right now? You would need to unmute to talk. Silence. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Yes, Judy?
Well, I could share a little bit something. When I think about water, I guess when I think about relationships, water isn't the first thing that comes to mind. Plants are more kind of where I go. But I'm just struck by the idea when you said even washing dishes, to be mindful of it. And I'm just struck by, that brings up to me the stories of Brother Lawrence in the practice of the presence of God, that everything you do is a prayer, if it's done right. Absolutely everything. Yeah. And that's just such a beautiful realization that can calm you down so much, just to recognize that every act, it doesn't end with you, it doesn't begin with you. It's a prayer that flows through you.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Judy. Yeah, every act is a prayer. For sure. May it be. Would anybody else like to share anything? Or if you have any questions or comments in general?
Kevin has a hand raised.
Well, first of all, thank you, Elizabeth, for this very sensitive and rich contemplation of the importance of water in our lives and in the life of the earth. I taught geography, mostly physical geography, for 20 years, and the emphasis of what I did was on the water cycle and the climates and how that influences everything else in dramatic ways. Before that, I did a dissertation on the second Isaiah and talked about how water, maybe in the Hebrew Bible, God's control of the limits of the water cycle was a kind of relational power in all kinds of instances. I looked at the book that you've written, and there's a section there on Christianity and water and baptism and so on, but not the Hebrew scriptures. In Buddhism also, there's a really heavy importance. I think you have a chapter in your book also on water. But so I'm embarrassed to say I don't have many practices. I'm really embarrassed to say that I don't about and around water, that I've taking it for granted and not ritualizing or sensitizing myself to the immediate importance of water all the time and everywhere. So I have formulated a question here, but it's more like I'm asking if you have something else you can say about the connection of water to life, and maybe water in the ecosphere as the blood of the womb of Mother Earth. I don't know. So I'm making that up because that's kind of what I am feeling now as I'm writing some other stuff.
Mhm.
But all living subjects are composed of water.
Yeah.
We all are.
Mhm.
And I mean, water is just essential to everything
Yeah.
that is around us, and we don't pay attention. So can you say some more about the connection of water to life in any tradition that you'd like to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I've heard many traditions say that water is like rivers are like the veins, the blood of the earth. And likewise, the ocean is like the salty womb where all life comes from. And this hydrological cycle is like a circulatory system, continually flowing throughout different beings. So those are some of the things that I think about. But also I think about the Gaia hypothesis, and Stephen Harding and Lynn Margulis, they have written about how life and water have been completely intertwined, and without life's involvement in processes like geological processes and atmospheric processes, metabolic processes, then the earth would have lost water a long time ago, and we'd have this dry, barren world. And so water and the other aspects of our earth, they're completely interdependent upon one another. It's not just that water brings life, but life helps water stay here. And also, I think he's a scientist, Vernadsky. He says that life is animated water. And I just loved that. Just thinking about how the different ways that water can be shaped and can move around on Earth. It takes the form in a lot of ways with particular life forms. And also if you think about say different foods, like whenever the water goes into making a particular kind of food, and then that food is taken to another part of the world, that's water moving from one part of the world to another. And so that's one reason why it's so important to try to eat as locally as you can, and also to drink the water that you drink. Make sure that it's as local as it can be too, so that we don't move water from one part of the world to another and further disrupt the balance. So yeah, those are just a few thoughts. Thank you, Kevin. And also, it's okay that you don't have practices right now. Please don't feel embarrassed. I guess my own bent into this is like very practice oriented. But yeah, I realize it's not necessarily how everyone else thinks.
Betsy?
Did somebody say Betsy?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
me.
she's got her hands up. And then Kathy.
This is just amusing. It's not a question really, unless I hope you will want to comment on it. But your presentation recalled to me my childhood memories of spending countless hours sitting by streams and waterfalls and lakes. I grew up in northern Minnesota, Canada, where there are more lakes than there is land. And water has always had a mesmerizing effect on me. And then, and that in truth, that also includes just getting lost, staring off over the ocean, at the beach. And my late husband was a scientist, and he always told me that that we humans are, 70 or 80% water, and the mesmerizing effect water has on me has to do with the fact that most of my molecules resonate with the molecules of the water that's nearby. I don't know what the scientific, data is behind that, but that made sense to me on some kind of really basic spiritual level. And water, I have always felt like water has been talking to me all my life. So those are just my thoughts, and I'd be interested if you have any to add to that.
Thank you, Betsy. That's beautiful. It makes sense that you feel resonant with water because you are mostly water. Yeah. Like we're born, I think 80 or 90% water. And then as we get older, it's about 70% water. And as we get very old, if we're that lucky, then we keep losing more and more water. And then we slowly return to the earth, and that kind of dissolution of the elements is really present just with the amount of water that we have throughout our lives. And you reminded me of a practice that one of my friends has, where every time she would go to a new place, she would immediately go to the body of water that would be most present, and she would put her hands in that water to try to feel connected and grounded in that particular place. And I think that's a beautiful practice. And in general, also just the practice of learning your particular watershed. That one is so crucial. Like where's the water that coming from that you drink? And where does it go once it leaves your body? Those two questions, if you can learn the name of that water, like if it's a river, if it's a reservoir, if it's water from an underground aquifer, if it's the rainwater, like where do you get your water? And then where does that water go? Is there a wastewater treatment plant near you? And like just learn how to see your own particular place in terms of the water flowing through that place. And that can help see your place in the larger hydrological cycle, in the larger earth community, because you see that the water flowing through your place is that same water flowing through our whole earth. So that's a good, helpful practice. I see a few different hands. So how about Kathy? You go next, and then Linda, and then how about Jonathan Paul, and then Annie, and then we'll call in some more people after that.
I just have a couple comments to share that have come from what's been said. And one that you just mentioned, I remember when I was reading one of Robin Wall Kimmerer's books. I don't recall which one it was, but she was speaking about the pond or the that she has on her property, and being and fully knowing that the water that so purely flowed through her pond, her property, was flowing into one of the most polluted places in wherever it was going. So there's in New York somewhere or wherever, and the grief that brought, not to her, but also it's one of the moments that was just really touching for me as I read that in her book. And the other thing is kind of a cute aside. I have a friend, and she has grandchildren who come from an area, I think in California somewhere. And the littlest one, maybe 4 or 5, asked her, "Grandma, where is the bucket in your shower? And so now she has a bucket in her shower.
That's wonderful. It's great that the next generation's already helping to teach. Yeah. Linda, did you want to go next?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I have a question, but similar to Kevin, a desire to express really a personal, renewed personal sense of gratitude for the gift of your presence, Elizabeth, because, you know, as I've mentioned to you, I just before we began that I felt there was a warmth, a heart to your writing, and yet I didn't take on practices. And as you spoke, it was like when here and good information to have, but as you spoke, I felt one of those really healthy senses of an ache that I do take drinking water like more of a task. I know I don't drink enough. You're supposed to drink X amount of water a day, and I should drink more water. And just how you spoke of it, I feel really invited to engage in that. I don't know. I'm really touched, and it even brought. I read the blurb in the beginning, and not the blurb, but a line. I offer endless gratitude to all my relations, including water, my friend, teacher, and guide. We have a stream, a small beck, or a creek running through Still Point. And we've lived here since 2008, and I've never looked to her, to this water, as my guide and my teacher and my friend. And I feel a warmth, but also like a wake up to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It's wonderful to hear. Yeah. Jonathan Paul, did you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Every time I've listened to you, it's even more and more refreshing, more regenerative. So it's, it's very good here in Texas, where we're needing water now because it's pretty dry and we've had some major fires. But so water is really, really important. And although I do know that bridge at Esland, and that's there's a very special place there, crossing that bridge. But what also, and who said that water is the blood of the earth? I think that was Victor Schauberger, who was the water researcher that said that. But that's always struck me. But also, I like that quote: "Life is animated water." And the whole sense of conscious water, I'm really liking the way that you're bringing. I mean, it's the ideas here, but then the practices. That is so important to what Linda was saying. That is to be, to walk with water. Now there's a really interesting Father Sebastian Kneipp in Germany in the 19th century, a town called Bad Vorishofen, west of Munich, about 2 hours by train. He had a whole therapeutic regime. If anyone knows about it, but don't confuse it. There, he made also bath oils, but there's a whole therapeutic procedure where he integrated water, diet, movement, nature, and prayer, and was a very, very successful. He even treated the Pope at one point at the end of the 19th century. In fact, there was even a group of in Rome City, Indiana, not too far from Notre Dame, that was a major sanitarium for this Kneipp, but it was primarily based on water. And so there's a lot of interesting things there. But the question, there's also now a scientific question here, which I think is very interesting, is information. They're now actually scientifically, we're being able to show and prove, like Emoto and different people, that they're actually able to embed information in water. And of course, information over time is memory. So the question the metaphysical question I would ask is, does water dream? And if the waters of earth dream, what are they dreaming? And so, but it's kind of just you know, a Zen question, but I really appreciate your work greatly, and this the practices I think is really, really key. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I love that question. Does water dream? Yeah. It just reminds me of, yeah, The Dream of the Earth, Thomas Berry. I keep bringing him up. He's a big inspiration for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the dream of water. What is the dream of water? And I just want to make a comment about Masaru Emoto. I haven't done a whole lot of research with Emoto's work, but he's one of the most popular people. Like every time I talk with somebody about water, they're like, "Do you know Emoto?" And yeah, I've read a little bit of his work, and I'm not positive if his work can be replicated or not. I personally don't know enough of the research, but what I find really true about what he's doing is the importance of intention and the importance of like coming to something like water, and to not have a constricted attitude, but have this openness, to have a spaciousness whenever you interact, to have gratitude, to interact in a loving way. And whether or not that changes water, that's a question for me. But I know for sure that it changes my particular water body. I know for sure that it changes my own consciousness. And so that, I just think it's so important to remember intention, and to remember like how you approach water will definitely affect how you're acting, how you act with that water, and also the other beings that you interact with. So I just wanted to make that little point. Annie, would you like to go next?
Yes, Elizabeth, I met you when our Water Spirit group read your book a few weeks ago. And so I have been doing the practices, or some of the practices that are in your book. And I wanted to remind everybody who might be from Bellingham that the name Whatcom, Native American, means talking water. You've been talking about, or noisy water, I guess is what it means. And that we're surrounded by these noisy waters. And I walk in Whatcom Falls Park, where Whatcom Creek goes, and many others I'm sure do as well. But your practices have helped me to listen and to really pay closer attention. And it has been very meaningful and a very positive experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie. It's good to see you again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Deborah, did you want to say something?
I'd kind of like to take our perception of water maybe one step forward, and it kind of goes along the lines of what Jonathan was talking about, in as far as does water dream? I enlisted in the United States Navy back in the 1980s. And one of my first duty assignments was working on tugboats in New England. So we would go out on tugboats into the Sound, chase down submarines and the cargo ships and all the rest of these things, and tow them back into the sub base. And one night, or one day, one evening, we went out to go get a sub and to bring it in. And the sub was pretty much a no-show. It got lost somewhere. But while we were waiting, you know, I was sitting in the aft section of the boat, and we have the tug lines, and we curl them up into figure eights to keep them clear off the decks. So I took and I curled up inside of one of those hawser lines, and I sat And we were in the water and there was no land in sight. No land whatsoever. So I sat there and I watched the sun go down, watched it sink into the water itself. And I thought to myself, how many sunsets has she seen? Over, and the immensity of that thought in terms of how long water has been on this earth, has been a part of this earth. What has she been witness to in all that time? And what are the stories that she could tell about all the passage of time? And it was immense. It was just this immense weight. It wasn't bad, but it was that sense of humility, absolute humility.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Deborah.
She's a storyteller.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Jillian?
Thank you. I feel like I want to continue the thread of humility that you offer, Deb, and that you too, Elizabeth, really embody. At least that's my experience in being present with you this evening. And we've talked about practices and we haven't used the word commodification in this conversation. And I feel like because we are being invited to be with water as kin, as friend, as teacher, it's important to address how water has been commodified and how do we artfully and skillfully and compassionately reach out to others who are not aware of this. And so one of my practices is to humbly and compassionately address those who are clearly unaware of the commodification of water, who are selling water in plastic bottles, etc., to skillfully and continue to learn how to invite them into what you're describing in ways that are accessible to them. It may not have a spiritual tone to it, but more this sense of kinship and respect and compassion. So because we're the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice, I feel like it's really important to bring this element into the conversation. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up. Yeah, we can't keep making profit on water because profitizing on water makes it so that people who can't afford water can't get it. And also big bottling companies, they often move water from people who aren't able to fight loud enough to keep it there in that particular place. And so there's a big injustice with the privatization of water. So yeah, we definitely need more work toward making water accessible to all people all around the world. Yeah. Margaret or Peggy?
Peggy. jumping in on the justice part. About 10 years ago, I was at Ghost Ranch, which is in New Mexico. And the focus was on the sacrality of water throughout the different traditions. But we also were looking at the Rio Grande and a few of the other tributaries, and how the practice of the American government was to allow Native Americans to have the surface soil, but everything beneath that, which would include aquifers, was owned by the government and managed by the government and mismanaged by the government. And so with uranium creation, it polluted the water that these, in a land of water scarcity, they didn't have control over it, but they had to deal with the eons of pollution. The other thing I used to do was help raise money for small rural areas in Uganda, which I became aware of specifically because it was affecting the lives of girls, that they would have to travel long distances, which obviously would interrupt their schooling, to gather water in fairly dangerous areas, both in terms of their own health and then, the risk of rape and other things. And so the idea was to collaborate with them to build wells deep enough that they would not have to travel, which would allow them to be safe and also to be able to be schooled, where, it still isn't considered a right for a girl to have that. So there's a global justice issue in very micro ways in that instance. And then I'm representing the local synagogue, and I did a little bit of research because I didn't know much about water and Judaism. And one of the things that struck me was two things. That in ancient Hebrew, there are 6 words for rain, which I thought was really interesting. The native people being very attuned to forms of water because of the scarcity. But also in Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, you're supposed to say 300 blessings a day, which is a form of almost Buddhist attention, that there isn't one act that you don't say a blessing before and a blessing after. And there are specific terms for it, but all of them start with the word Baruch, which means bless. And I looked that up, and actually the core part of that word, the root of it, is the word pool, like in a pool of water, but an infinite pool, which they associate with God. And so I thought that was an interesting idea, that if you're Orthodox and you're praying or blessing or bringing to your attention spiritually, the idea that everything is sort of the purification of yourself, the focus of yourself is on water, and that water being associated as a nourishing God.
I love that. Thank you so much, Peggy. So beautiful. Wow. We're nearing the end of our time, so I'd like to do a little closing. I'd like to read a short passage by Starhawk from the Earth Path. I learned this passage from a recent email from Water Spirit. So thank you, Water Spirit. If you don't know them, look them up. So this is a blessing for water. So it goes right along with what Peggy was just saying. Praise and gratitude to the sacred waters of the world, to the oceans, the mother of life, the womb of the plant life that freshens our air with oxygen, the brew that is stirred by sunlight and the moon's gravity into the great currents and tides that move across the earth, circulating the means of life, bringing warmth to the frozen Arctic and cool, fresh winds to the tropics. We give thanks for the blessed clouds and the rain that brings the gift of life to the land, that eases the thirst of roots, that grows the trees and sustains life, even in the dry desert. We give thanks for the springs that bring life-giving water up from the ground, for the small streams and creeks, for the mighty rivers. We praise the beauty of water, the sparkle of the sunlight on a blue lake, the shimmer of moonlight on the ocean's waves, the white spray of the waterfall. We take delight in the sweet singing of the dancing stream and the roar of the river in the flood. We ask help to know within ourselves all the powers of water, to wear down and to build up, to ebb and to flow, to nurture and to destroy, to merge and to separate. We know that water has great powers of healing and cleansing, and we also know that water is vulnerable to contamination and pollution. We ask help in our work as healers, in our efforts to ensure that the waters of the world run clean and run free, that all the earth's children have the water they need to sustain abundance of life. Blessed be the water. I want to thank you so much for coming. And I turn it back. I forget who I'm turning it back to.
Back to me.
Brian, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. You have our gratitude for sharing what you shared tonight and all that's behind it, all the research and work that not all of us have time and resources and skills to do, but you were able to be our liaison tonight for that. So thank you very much. I personally loved the connections, both between the personal interconnectedness as well as how directly tied those are to justice issues. And I think we wove our way through all of that tonight. And to me, it was beautiful the way that people raised those issues, those various threads of this whole big picture topic. But Elizabeth, we're grateful for you for being something of our guide tonight, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much.
I do want to give a couple of minutes here to Judy, who's going to share something that I think is also very much connected to all of this. It's already been mentioned tonight, the Sacred Earth Fair. So Judy, why don't you share with us a little bit about that, what's coming up that's a big important event.
Well, what I've got here is our latest announcement about the Sacred Earth Fair that's coming up on July 31st. And what we're trying to do is update each month with a little bit more about what we're doing or what we're hoping to get done, and as it shapes up. And on the right of this poster, you'll notice that we have some of the headliners. We're having headliners because we're going to have music and we're going to have storytelling, and we're going to have opportunities for interaction and talk, as well as booths and information about how we can act on with integrity, on our intention to do what we can for the earth. And I want to bring your attention to the first of these. I would imagine that most of you know Swilcanum, but if you don't, just in case you don't, I want to tell you a little bit about him. Let's see if I can, oops, wrong one. Oops, let's try again. Well, for some reason, it won't come up right. Wouldn't you know? Well, but Swilcanum is a violin virtuoso who has received awards all around the country, and it's actually traveled internationally. Here we go. That's what we need to see. He's the kind of person who can touch your heart when you're least expecting it. And it's really a blessing to be around him. I have personal stories about interacting with Swilcanum that still bring tears to my eyes to tell them. But he has a way of seeing into your heart. And he really has a dedication to building community by helping individuals find out and recognize and honor themselves. so that they can act with integrity in their community. It's a beautiful thing. So his performances combine his amazing violin compositions with storytelling and with audience interaction. And it's a lovely thing. I didn't know this, did a little research on Swill. It turns out he's also an actor. He was in like 24 episodes of Northern Exposure, one of my favorite shows, but and also was in The Business of Fancy Dancing, and movies and like that. But he's worked a lot in the school systems. He's been featured on TV and radio around the world, actually. And so this is the work of his life, and I think it really fits that we're having him at the fair. And I want to thank Deb very much for making sure that he was able to join us. But I also wanted to just mention that it's especially appropriate that he be joining us in this fair because he really has a personal understanding of the challenges of climate change. In the past floods in November, Swill's home was destroyed in the flooding in the northern part of the county. So he really has firsthand experience as well as an empathy for the people around him that I think is going to add a lot to our experience in the show. And you know, if anybody has questions about the Earth Fair and what all we're going to do, I would be more than happy to answer questions. No, I can't get this thing to do it right. But I'd be more than happy to answer questions, and you can email me at thesacredearthfair@gmail.com, and we can do that. And one of the things that we especially want from our communities is contact with youth, because we are going to be having listening circles, so that those of us who are gray-haired, as almost everybody on this screen is, can hear and listen to the young people who are inheriting this earth from us. They have a lot to say, and sometimes it's very hard to hear it. But we intend to make that an opportunity so we can share what we're doing. But when you come to the fair, look for two things. One is to hear your neighbors, hear what they care about, and hear what they've experienced. And the other is to find ways you can act starting at the fair and moving out from there for the rest of whatever time you have on this earth to work to save it. That's all I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thank you, Judy, for sharing that. And I did put a link in the chat there. So if you would like some more information, you can click on that link in the chat. We are nearing the end of our time tonight as the official gathering time. However, we will not run off too quickly. So if there are people that would like to continue to share some thoughts with each other, there might be opportunity for that. I do want to thank you each again for coming and investing the time tonight. It's something of a challenge still, even after all this time, to invest in relationships that are two-dimensional on a screen in front of you, and it takes some extra effort and diligence. So, but it's been, I think, really rich, as was mentioned earlier tonight, the connections of each person that's been here. So all of us, we all have a connection. We all have a connection to water, and I think we also have a greater appreciation and understanding. And I am confident that each of us is going away slightly more connected, at least, to the water around us than when we came in tonight. So I hope that you found that that's worth your while as well. Blessings to all of you. And again, you may feel free to leave now. You can also feel free to stay and chat a little bit if you would like. And thank you, especially to Elizabeth again for being here with us, a special guest.